Hi, my name is Paula, and I never thought I would be telling this story. Growing up, I always knew where I stood in my family, second place at best. My sister Emma was the star, the one who always got the attention, the praise, and the love. From the time I was 5 years old and Emma was born, I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be the favorite. My parents told me I'd have a best friend for life, someone to share everything with. What they didn't mention was that, from the moment she entered our world, Emma would take center stage. Don't get me wrong, Emma wasn't a bad person. She just wasn't aware. And why would she be? Every ounce of our parents' energy, love, and attention seemed to pour into her. I could see it all. Each morning, Mom would make Emma a perfect breakfast. 2 eggs sunny side up, toast cut diagonally, just how my princess liked it. Meanwhile, I would get tossed a box of cereal and told to pour my own milk. But it was more than just breakfast. Emma would get all the new clothes, the sparkly accessories, and when she needed braces, they spent months saving up for them, while I was told that my crooked teeth were fine for now. Then, of course, there were the birthday parties. Emma's were lavish affairs, complete with bounce houses, hired entertainers, and custom cakes. Mine? Well, I always had a supermarket cake with a few friends in the backyard. I learned early on that my life was going to be lived in the shadow of my sister's achievements. No one noticed when I won science fairs, aced AP classes, or managed to survive in a home where I was considered practical compared to Emma's princess lifestyle. Emma changed a lot as we grew older. She started out sweet, sure, but as time went on, she became exactly what you would expect from someone who was constantly told she was perfect. By the time she hit middle school, she had no problem ransacking my closet and demanding whatever she wanted. I was expected to just hand it over, and when I didn't, I was called selfish. I didn't even bother to stand up for myself anymore. It was easier to just let her take it all. By the time I was in high school, I had learned to be self-sufficient. I wasn't going to get the praise or the recognition from my parents, so I found validation in other places. School became my escape. While Emma was getting praise for landing 2 lines in the school play, I was winning state science fairs and excelling in my studies. It didn't matter to my parents. Every time Emma had a minor achievement, it was like the entire house came to a standstill to celebrate. Meanwhile, my Dean's List achievements and internship offers barely earned a glance. When I got into state university on a full scholarship, I thought that finally, something would change. My family would be proud. But no. The dinner that night was dominated by Emma's dramatic retelling of her school election campaign for student council. Sure, she was charismatic, but the fact that I had just received a full scholarship seemed to mean nothing. They weren't even really listening to me. It was as though I wasn't even in the room. I tried to get their attention, but Emma had already seized it all, and that was the last time I tried to hope for any kind of recognition. I just kept my head down, did my work, and waited to leave for college at the earliest possible moment. After I moved to campus, things didn't get any better. Every holiday break, I'd come home to my parents' house, and every time the story was the same. They'd talk about Emma's new accomplishments, her new job, her life, and me. I was just there, a shadow in the corner of the room. I quickly learned that my time at home was not a time for me to be celebrated. It was a time for me to witness Emma's latest round of applause. Still, I pushed through. I focused on my studies, and I kept telling myself that one day things would be different. I was going to make something of myself. I was going to show everyone that I was more than just the invisible daughter in the background. And I did. After graduation, I got a job at Turner & Associates as a project manager. I thought this would be my moment, a fresh start, but nothing really changed. My parents never really celebrated my success. Emma's problems and dramas, her constant fight to be perfect, continued to take center stage. And then, one day, I got a Facebook message that would change my life. This is just the beginning of my story. As you'll soon see, my journey is about to take a turn that I didn't expect. But before I get ahead of myself, I want you to know something. This is about learning to stand up for yourself, no matter how many years you've spent living in someone else's shadow. If you've ever been overlooked or taken for granted, I hope my story will resonate with you, because this is where it all begins. I hadn't expected Mike to reach out. We'd been in different worlds in high school. Me just starting out, him already a senior. He was in debate. I was, well, I was trying to survive the day-to-day of being overshadowed by Emma, but the message from him brought something unexpected: hope. We started talking, and it was nice. Just casual conversations at first, college stories, reminiscences about high school, but after a few months, it became clear that there was something deeper between us. Mike was kind, and he actually seemed interested in my life, something I wasn't used to. He didn't see me through the lens of Emma's constant spotlight, and that was refreshing. It felt like a second chance, someone actually paying attention to me, for me. We started meeting up when I was back home for the holidays, and soon after graduation, I moved back to the town where I'd grown up. Mike had a job as an engineer at a firm, and when I found out about an opening at Turner and Associates, I jumped at the chance. I had my own place now, a job that meant something, and Mike and I were inseparable. Things seemed to be falling into place, but no matter how much I achieved, no matter how much success I seemed to have, it didn't seem to matter. My parents? They still hadn't changed. Every time I went to visit them, I was greeted with the same old routine. Emma would show up, and the attention would shift. Even after I bought a place, a small one-bedroom apartment, they barely acknowledged it. Instead, the focus would inevitably drift back to Emma and her struggles. "She's having such a hard time adjusting to college life," Mom would sigh into the phone. Emma's problems, Emma's issues, nothing had changed. The revolving door of praise for Emma had no end, and I felt like I was still living in the shadows. But I had Mike's family now. Tom and Sarah, his parents, were like the family I always wanted. They treated me like I mattered. They were proud of me when I closed my first big deal at work. They made me feel like I belonged. Jenny, Mike's sister, was like the sibling I never had. She treated me as an equal, never a comparison to Emma. It was at one of those family dinners when Mike and I were celebrating our recent wedding. Nothing extravagant, just a simple backyard ceremony at his parents' house, that I realized something was fundamentally different about the way my parents treated me. They showed up, of course, but their attention was diverted once again to Emma. "How's Emma handling things?" they'd ask between bites of cake. Meanwhile, my accomplishments seemed to disappear into the background. I tried not to let it bother me. I had my own life, my own happiness, and Mike was my biggest support. But when we found out I was pregnant, everything started to change. I was overjoyed. This was going to be the new chapter in my life, the start of something I'd always dreamed of. Mike was elated too, and for the first time in my life, it seemed like I had everything I wanted. That was when everything fell apart. Our son Lucas was born healthy and happy, but soon after he turned 1, I noticed a change in Mike. He started working late, canceling plans, and avoiding me. I told myself it was the stress of being a new parent, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, thinking it would pass, but then the confession came. One evening, as I was feeding Lucas in his high chair, Mike walked in looking like he hadn't slept in days. He sat down and told me, his voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. I've met someone else. Her name's Rachel. She's a client at work, and I'm in love with her." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I felt everything I had worked so hard for crumbling around me. Mike moved out shortly after that conversation. The divorce was surprisingly civil, and he promised to keep paying child support and alimony, but it didn't make it any easier. I had to explain to Lucas why his daddy wasn't coming home anymore, and that broke my heart. In the wake of it all, I leaned on Mike's family for support. They stepped in without hesitation, offering help and love when I felt like I was sinking. Tom and Sarah adored Lucas. They never made me feel like I was alone. They were present in a way my own parents had never been. Jenny was always there with a smile and a hug, making everything feel just a little less heavy. But when I tried to involve my parents, it was always the same cold response. They treated Lucas as if he was an inconvenience, a burden. I remember one of the first times I took him to visit them after the divorce. He was just a toddler, still figuring out the world, and all my mother could say was, "Don't let him touch that vase." And that was when it hit me. My parents didn't just ignore me, they ignored their own grandchild. Things grew more distant between us. The visits became fewer and fewer as I spent more time with Mike's family, who were everything I had longed for. My parents would always ask about Emma, never about me. They would praise Emma's newest job or the time she was spending at a big trading company. Meanwhile, Lucas was growing up without their involvement, without their love. It stung, but I was learning to accept it. After all, my parents had never really seen me, not truly, but I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. At work, I was killing it. I took on more responsibility and closed some of the biggest deals in my company's history. My boss noticed, my colleagues noticed, and I didn't have to share the spotlight with anyone. I got a promotion to senior account director, a salary that made my eyes water, and a corner office to boot. The validation I had never received from my own family was coming from the professional world, and yet, even though things were finally looking up, a familiar pattern started to emerge. My parents reached out, asking for help. At first, it was small things, help with a plumbing bill, paying for a new refrigerator. But it soon escalated. One Sunday, Dad mentioned needing a new car. He claimed it was too expensive for them to handle on their own. The figure they suggested would have made me choke a year ago, but now it was manageable. I agreed to help. Maybe it was my way of proving something to myself. Maybe it was my way of showing them that I had arrived, that I was capable of providing for myself and for my family. Maybe I thought that by helping them, I could finally get some acknowledgement, some love, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. This was just the beginning. What I thought would be a simple favor ended up unraveling everything. After college, I thought I'd found the peace I was looking for. I landed a great job as a project manager at Turner & Associates, and I was finally living the life I had worked so hard for. Mike and I started seeing each other more seriously, and before long, we were apartment hunting together. We even found a cozy spot, one that was all our own. The only thing that seemed to remain was the distance I felt from my family, particularly from my parents. Even when I moved back home after college, things didn't change. My parents barely acknowledged my achievements. They were too busy fretting over Emma's transition to college and the stress she was dealing with. It was always Emma this and Emma that. In the midst of their worrying over her life, I was just there, not seen. I had Mike's family to make up for the void my own family left. Tom and Sarah, Mike's parents, embraced me as their own, and Jenny, his sister, became the sister I had always wanted in Emma. Mike and I were married in a small ceremony in his parents' backyard, surrounded by close friends and family. But of course, even that simple celebration was tainted. My parents were there, but their focus was on Emma. They barely acknowledged the wedding at all, except to ask about Emma's summer internship. They spent most of the reception talking about her future. It was clear where their loyalty lay. Still, I had Mike and his family. I had a career that was growing, and I had hope for the future. But life wasn't done testing me. The next few years were filled with highs and lows. When we found out I was pregnant, it was a joy I couldn't describe. Mike was ecstatic, and we were both ready for this new chapter in our lives. Then, just after Lucas was born, things took an unexpected turn. Mike started pulling away. He worked late, canceled our date nights, and seemed to be emotionally distant. At first, I blamed it on the new parent's stress, but deep down, I could feel that something wasn't right. I tried to be patient, thinking it was just a phase, but the tension grew. I started to feel like I was losing him, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The confession came one Tuesday night. I was feeding Lucas in his high chair, feeling exhausted but happy. Mike came home looking tired, his eyes hollow. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. "I've met someone else. Her name is Rachel. She's a client at work, and I'm in love with her." I could barely breathe. The floor seemed to fall out beneath me. How could this happen? We had a family, a life we were building together. The words felt like they were coming from someone else, not the man I had married. The divorce, when it came, was surprisingly civil. Mike moved to Colorado with Rachel, but promised to pay alimony and child support. He was a bad husband, he admitted, but he wouldn't be a bad father. I was numb. I signed the papers in a lawyer's office, holding Lucas close. He was too young to understand why his father wasn't coming home anymore, but I wasn't sure how I was going to explain it when he was older. After the divorce, it was Mike's family who became my lifeline. Tom and Sarah, despite everything, remained devoted grandparents to Lucas. Jenny was the sister I never had. She helped me keep my life together. My own family? Well, that was another story. I made occasional visits to my parents, hoping that they would want to be part of Lucas's life, but it was always the same. The coldness, the distance, the lack of interest in my son. "Paula, don't let him touch that vase," my mom would snap, barely looking up from her magazine. "Make sure he doesn't run around too much. He'll scratch the hardwood floors." Lucas, sensing the coldness, would cling to my leg, unsure of how to get their attention. The contrast was stark. When Emma would show up, my parents would beam. "There's my successful girl," Dad would say, and they would hang on her every word. Meanwhile, Lucas, their only grandson, would show them his drawings, but they barely looked up from their conversations with Emma. Those visits became less frequent. It was easier to spend time with Jenny and her family, who actually showed an interest in Lucas and in me. I focused on my work. I excelled. I took on bigger projects at Turner & Associates. I was offered a challenging account with Singapore, a deal that had been impossible to close for 3 years. But I did it. I closed the deal and expanded it to twice its size. This was my moment. The promotion came next, and I became a senior account director. My salary increased, and with it came the possibility of a new home for Lucas and me. That's when things took an unexpected turn. I bought us a new home, a 3-bedroom apartment with a park nearby. Lucas was thrilled to have his own space, a room just for him, with a special art corner and enough space for all his toys. It was a fresh start. I could finally feel like I was building something for us that was truly ours. But just when I thought life was on the right track, something changed again. The call from my mom was the first hint. "Sweetie, we haven't seen you and Lucas in ages. Why don't you come over this weekend?" I was stunned. I hadn't heard from them in months, and now they wanted to see us? I hesitated but decided to take Lucas to their house. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe they'd really made an effort. But when we arrived, the contrast was impossible to ignore. They greeted Lucas warmly, calling him their favorite grandson, and even bought him a new toy truck. They made cookies, something they had never done for him before, but I could see it for what it was, an attempt to buy back my love, and it worked. At first, I let myself believe they had changed, but the truth was, the real test would come later. I started receiving requests from my parents for money. It started small, helping with a plumbing bill, paying for repairs. Then it escalated. They wanted money for a new car. The payments were steep, but they assured me they'd pay me back. I agreed, despite Jenny's warnings. Maybe I was just trying to prove something to myself. Maybe I was trying to show them that I was enough, that I could buy their love. But I was wrong, and I was about to learn the hard way that no amount of money would ever fill the hole in my heart left by my parents' indifference. Things came to a head when I was diagnosed with appendicitis. That day, I was in the hospital, facing surgery, and needed someone to watch Lucas. I called my parents for help. The response? "We're too busy with Emma's promotion party," my mom said coldly. "We can't babysit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done for them, after all the money I had sent their way, this was how they treated me? I felt a cold wave of realization hit me. They were willing to drop me at the moment someone better came along. Emma with her career, her perfect life, her endless achievements. Lucas and I were just a burden. When I finally met Mike in person after years of high school and college, something clicked. It was like the universe was giving me a second chance. Mike was everything I needed in that moment. Attentive, kind, and understanding. We got along instantly, sharing stories about high school, college, and our mutual love for the small things in life that no one else seemed to care about. It wasn't long before we were inseparable, spending more and more time together. Things started to fall into place in a way I had never imagined. After a year of dating, we moved in together and began apartment hunting. Mike was supportive of my career and life choices, and for once, I felt like I was with someone who truly saw me, not as second place to someone else's brilliance, but as my own person. My parents barely acknowledged my career progression, but Mike's family, they were over the moon for me. They welcomed me as one of their own, treating me like a daughter, and Mike's sister, Jenny, became the sibling I had always hoped Emma would be. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a family where I was celebrated. When Mike and I married, we kept it simple. A backyard ceremony with close friends and family. My parents came, of course, but even at my wedding, Emma's shadow loomed large. They couldn't stop talking about her latest achievements, how she'd been struggling with some office politics, and how difficult her life was at work. I didn't even have to ask. I knew that, even though I was getting married and starting my own life, Emma was still the star of the show. It didn't matter to me, though, because Mike and his family were there, and that made all the difference. The years passed quickly. I dove into my career at Turner & Associates, taking on challenging projects and proving myself in a male-dominated field. Mike and I decided to start a family, and 2 years later, we had our son, Lucas. Mike was thrilled, and I couldn't wait to see him become the father I always knew he could be. For a while, life seemed perfect. I had a family of my own, and things were going well at work, but somewhere along the way, things shifted. After Lucas turned 1, Mike started pulling away. He became distant, working longer hours, canceling our date nights, and putting little effort into our marriage. I tried to write it off as the typical stress of parenthood, but I could feel it. Something wasn't right. The affection was gone, replaced by a coldness that grew each day. I tried to tell myself that it was just a phase, that once things settled down, we'd find our way back to each other. It was a Tuesday evening when Mike finally confessed. I was feeding Lucas when Mike walked in, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His voice was shaky as he said, "I need to tell you something." I could feel my heart sink. "I've met someone else," he continued. "Her name is Rachel. She's a client, and I'm in love with her." The world seemed to tilt under me as the weight of his words crashed down. The divorce was quick. Mike moved to Colorado with Rachel, and he promised he would always support Lucas, financially at least. I had signed the papers, not fully grasping how everything had unraveled so quickly. As hard as it was, Mike's family stayed by my side. They remained supportive, offering help with Lucas, and making sure I had a shoulder to lean on. My parents, however, were not so understanding. They barely acknowledged what had happened. Instead, I was left dealing with the fallout on my own, just as I had with every other life event up until then. Emma's life was too perfect for her to ever understand what I was going through. My parents couldn't even give me a moment of their time. I spent the following months picking up the pieces of my life. I had to focus on my job and raising Lucas, while still trying to carve out a future for us. At work, I got the opportunity to lead the high-risk Singapore account. It was an incredibly challenging task, but I accepted it head-on. 3 months later, I not only closed the deal, but expanded it beyond expectations. My boss was thrilled with my success. It was a moment of triumph, one that was for me and only me. No comparisons, no side comments about Emma's latest struggles. But even as I achieved success at work, I couldn't shake the weight of my family's neglect. It wasn't just that they ignored me, it was that they had chosen Emma's flaws over my strengths. It was a choice they had made over and over, whether it was my academic achievements, my job, or even the fact that I was now a mother. When I finally got the chance to buy a home for Lucas and me, I thought maybe this was the start of something new, a new chapter where I was in control and I could provide the life I always dreamed of. I found a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment with a park nearby, and I was ready to settle in. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval, but just as things started to look up, my parents came calling again. The difference was startling. They invited us over, welcomed us with open arms, and even bought Lucas a toy truck. It seemed too good to be true, and it was. The real test came when my parents asked me to help them with a few things. First, it was something small, like paying a bill, but it escalated quickly. It wasn't long before they asked for help with larger payments. It felt familiar. They'd always taken my help when it suited them, and now they expected it again. But this time, I had more to give. I had the money, and I thought, maybe this time it would mean something. Maybe this time they'd actually appreciate me. Then came the day I got the call. My appendix burst, and I was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. I had no one to call but my parents, but I was met with cold indifference. My mom told me she couldn't help because she was too busy celebrating Emma's promotion. My heart sank. Lucas was nothing more than a burden to them, just like I had been for so many years. That moment changed everything for me. When I realized that I had been trying to buy my parents' love for so long, I saw it for what it really was. They didn't care. And if they didn't care, then I couldn't keep giving them pieces of myself in hopes that one day they would change. My real family, the one that mattered, wasn't related to me by blood. It was Mike's family, Jenny, and the people who supported me. Truly, I wouldn't waste any more energy trying to get my parents' approval. And that was just the beginning. I was lying in my bed in the hospital trying to shake off the fog of anesthesia when the weight of the conversation with my parents hit me. I couldn't believe what had just happened. After everything, after all the times I'd been there for them, they couldn't even spare a moment to pick up Lucas from school. The phone call ended with my mother coldly dismissing me, calling my son a burden, and all because they were too busy attending Emma's promotion party. The words echoed in my mind, the pain of it worse than the surgery I'd just had. I should have known better, but it hurt too much. After everything I had done for them, paying their bills, covering their car payments, the constant support, they discarded me without a second thought the moment Emma's success came into play. It wasn't about family anymore. It was about who could do more for them, who had more to give. I called Jenny immediately. She was my lifeline, the one who had never let me down. She answered on the first ring. "Jenny, I'm in the hospital. I need help. Can you pick up Lucas from school? Please, I need someone." There was no hesitation in her voice. "Of course, I'll get him. Don't worry about a thing." The relief I felt hearing her voice was palpable. She didn't hesitate. She didn't make excuses. She just helped. And that was all I needed. I didn't have to ask twice. Jenny was family in a way my own parents had never been. Over the next few days, Jenny sent me updates about Lucas. He was happy, playing with her dog and making cookies with her. She even sent me pictures of him laughing and asleep, surrounded by stuffed animals. It was exactly what I needed, knowing that my son was surrounded by love, real love, while I recovered. When I got home from the hospital, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Jenny helped me settle in, stocked my fridge, and checked on me daily. It was a peaceful rhythm, one I hadn't realized I needed until it was here. My parents' neglect felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the care and warmth Jenny and her family had given us. But the phone calls from my parents didn't stop. They started again soon after I'd been discharged, and they came with more demands. "Can you help us with the car payment again, Paula? We're struggling, and Emma refuses to help," my mother said, with that sweet, manipulative tone that always made my skin crawl. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I stayed calm. "You know what's funny, Mom?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just 3 months ago, you called my son a burden. You hung up on me while I was in the hospital. And now you want me to bail you out again?" The words stung. It felt like a slap in the face, but I wasn't going to let them do this to me anymore. "No, Mom, I'm done. You've never appreciated me, and you've never appreciated Lucas. All you care about is what you can get," she stammered, trying to backtrack. But I didn't want to hear it. "You'll have to figure it out yourself," I said, my voice sharp. "The handouts are over. I'm done trying to buy your love." The call ended with me blocking their numbers. Both my mom and dad. I had enough. For the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need their approval. It was hard at first, but as time went on, I felt a sense of relief. I was free. I didn't check their social media anymore and didn't care about their lives. Instead, I focused on building a future for Lucas and me. Jenny's family was always there, filling the gaps that my own family never bothered to. They loved Lucas unconditionally, and that was all I needed. When Lucas came home from school one day with his family tree project, I felt a surge of pride. His tree didn't include my parents, but it didn't matter. It was filled with people who loved him, people who truly cared. Jenny, Tom, Sarah, and even Mike. They were all there. My parents weren't, and it felt right. "Mom, is this okay?" Lucas asked, holding up his project. I smiled, my heart full. "It's perfect, baby," I said, kissing his forehead. "Absolutely perfect. We had our family, and that was enough." Real family shows up, not just for the good times, but for the hospital runs and school pickups too. And in that moment, I knew that no amount of money could ever replace the love I had found with the people who truly mattered. It was a normal Tuesday. I was in the middle of a client presentation when I suddenly doubled over in pain. The sharp stabbing sensation spread through my body, and I could feel the cold sweat trickle down my neck. It was classic appendicitis. The ambulance arrived quickly, and I was rushed to the hospital. As they prepped me for surgery, one thought flashed through my mind: Lucas. He was still at school. I knew I needed someone to pick him up, but I wasn't sure who would help. I dialed my mom's number with trembling hands. "Mom," I said, trying to steady my voice, "I'm in the hospital. They need to operate right away. Can you pick up Lucas from school? There was a long pause. Then, in a tone that made my heart drop, she responded, "That's not possible, honey. We're getting ready for Emma's promotion party. It's a big event. We can't babysit Lucas." Her words stung like nothing else. "A burden," she'd called him. A burden? Just like that. As if he were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. I couldn't believe it. After everything I had done for them, this is what I got in return? The pain of the appendicitis felt like nothing compared to the heartbreak of that moment. She didn't care. She chose Emma's celebration over her grandson's, over mine, again. I quickly called Jenny, my best friend, and the only person I could count on. She didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll get him, Paula," she said. "I've got him covered." When I woke up after surgery, Jenny had already texted me, "Lucas is fine. We're having a blast. Don't worry about anything. Just rest." The relief was overwhelming. I realized something. My parents had never been there when I needed them, but Jenny and her family always were. I knew then that I wasn't just done with my parents. I was done with the whole cycle. I canceled the monthly payments for the car, blocked my parents on social media, and stopped answering their calls. No more would I be their personal ATM. No more would I accept their conditional love. A few months later, my mom reached out, asking for money again. This time, I wasn't angry. I was free. I calmly told her that I was done. I'd learned the hardest lesson. Real family shows up when it counts. And for the first time in my life, I knew that Lucas and I were finally free to build our own family, without any of the toxic ties from the past